Hey guys, welcome back to Gatsu Gaming. Today we're going to talk real quick about the Frost Death Knight. Frost has been one of those specs that a lot of people have been playing or really enjoying. There was a build or two where the spec was a little bit buggy, so it delayed making this video for a little bit until they got rid of those bugs. But it's mostly fixed now, a couple things still not working quite as intended, but all in all is actually a pretty enjoyable spec to play. So taking a quick look at talents here, in our 56 row, we have our Inexorable Assault. Gain Inexorable Assault every 8 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Obliterate consumes a stack to deal an additional 670 frost damage. This, of course, will scale with your mastery. The next talent here is Icy Talons. Your runic power spending abilities increase your melee attack speed by 5% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. And then returning for this expansion as a talent rather than a legendary is Cold Heart, albeit a little bit nerfed. So Cold Heart is now every 2 seconds you gain a stack of Cold Heart, causing your next Chains of Ice to deal 335 frost damage. This stacks up to 20 times, so it still hits very, very hard. Now, in general, this row here is just kind of where do you want a little bit of burst to come from, or do you need more sustained in the form of Icy Talons? For the most part, Icy Talons has done everything I want it to do for me, so I've been running this talent, just because at the start of the expansion here, we're looking at very, we'll say, questionable levels of stats when we first start out, just because as soon as you hit max level, which this character is not, I might add, this is a 111, I believe, 111, right? Yes, 111 Frost DK. So Icy Talons is imperative to have enough haste to proc your Rune of Razor Ice enough, and just to get enough auto attacks in that everything else works out well for you as well. Inexorable Assault will be great once we have the baseline stats that we need to make everything work correctly. And Cold Heart is definitely going to be the one you're going to pick if you need a reliable bit of burst, or even if you're just soloing because of how much damage it does. Keep in mind it no longer stuns, though, which is a huge change from when it was a legendary. In level 57 here, this is kind of our generation row. We have Runic Attenuation. Your auto attacks have a chance to generate 3 runic power. This pairs incredibly well with Icy Talons, of course. I chose Murderous Efficiency, which is consuming the Killing Machine effect. It's a 50% chance to grant you 1 rune. I'm just comfortable playing with Murderous Efficiency. It's literally nothing more than that. I'm just used to having this already. So I've been running it. However, I think ideally I would want to be running Icy Talons with Runic Attenuation. The final talent here is Horn of Winter, which is still kind of in an odd place. 45-second cooldown, you gain 2 runes and 25 runic power. I'm sure that this is one of those talents that if you're experienced with it and you know how to manage it properly, it is incredibly strong for you. That being said, I've not seen anyone in beta really playing with it, so I'm not sure if there's a bug involved with it, or if it just ends up getting, you know, with the math, being less powerful than Murderous Efficiency and Runic Attenuation at this point. I'll have to see how tuning goes. I like the original Horn of Winter where we got attack power. That was cool. But now it is a simple generation buff. So here in our 58 row, this is our sort of CC row. We have Death's Reach, increases the range of Death Grip by 10 yards, and killing an enemy that yields experience or honor will reset the cooldown on Death Grip. This is incredibly useful while you're leveling for very obvious reasons. Anytime you kill something, you can Death Grip something else in and just keep going, hence the Murderous Efficiency here. This is the one that I typically go to for most content. For Mythic Plus, though, I would probably be looking at either Asphyxiate or Blinding Sleep, depending on my group's needs. Asphyxiate is a 45-second cooldown, 20-yard range, 4 seconds stun. This is very, very powerful when you need that stun in your group and no one else in your group's able to bring it with you, or if you just need an extra one because maybe it's teaming or there's just enough mobs where you just really need that. Over here we have Binding Sleet. Targets in a cone in front of you are blinded, causing them to wander around disoriented for 5 seconds. Damage may cancel this effect. Most of the time in a Mythic Plus, this thing will typically be used as essentially an AoE interrupt. It works very, very well for that. Of course, it breaks almost instantly if there's any kind of AoE going on, but it is very, very powerful for that. This is also pretty useful in PvP as well, just because if you can blind an entire group trying to kill you, you can get away much quicker. Level 60 row here, we have Avalanche. Casting Howling Blast with Rime active causes your jagged icicles to fall on enemies nearby your target, dealing some extra frost damage. This is just completely passive, which is why I've been running it here. Typically for Mythic Plus, you're going to be running Frost Scythe, most likely, or Frozen Pulse. I just picked Avalanche because I'm using Howling Blast a ton because of our AoE pools, and was just kind of playing around with it to see what the damage was like. Frozen Pulse is also a completely passive thing here. While you have fewer than 3 full runes, your auto attacks radiate intense cold, inflicting 151 frost damage on all nearby enemies. This is just consistent pulsing damage from you, of course. This is really boring, but it's also very easy to keep active almost all the time. Not very useful for leveling, in my opinion, just because I kill something and I have nothing left, because you can't typically pull a ton of mobs at a time. But may have its uses somewhere in dungeons. I'm just not sure where at this point. Then, of course, you have Frost Scythe, 1 rune, instant, a sweeping attack that strikes all enemies in front of you for 469 frost damage. This attack does benefit from Killing Machine, and crit strikes with it deal 4 times normal damage. Frost Scythe is an exceedingly powerful AoE tool. If you're going to be pulling really big all the time, Frost Scythe is probably going to be the pick you're going to want, just because it's going to deal an absurd amount of damage. At this point in beta, from what I've seen and tested with this, Obliterate will hit harder whenever you get a guaranteed crit than Frost Scythe on single targets still, which is good, because replacing Obliterate would be silly. However, of course, on 2 targets, Frost Scythe is head and shoulders above it. So if you're going to have heavy sustained cleave, Frost Scythe is probably the one you're going to want to go for. At 75 row here, we have our survivability / movement row. Permafrost, your auto attacks grant you an absorb shield equal to 40% of the damage dealt. Permafrost pairs incredibly well with Runic Attenuation and Icy Talons, giving you more attack speed, extra chances to generate Runic Power to go with the Icy Talons, and then an extra absorb shield too. This is super useful when you're leveling, just because it is a consistent amount of extra HP, so to speak. It gives you a little more effective HP, and is also not something you have to manage too intensely. This will save you quite a bit when you're fighting elites. Wraithwalk, this is now moved to a talent as opposed to a standard ability, which is kind of awkward really to see it here. But this is a channeled 1-minute cooldown. You sidestep into the Shadowlands, wherever that is, removing all root effects and increasing your movement speed by 70% for 4 seconds. Any other action you take will cancel it, and while active, you cannot be reduced below 170% movement speed, which is almost epic mount speed. So Wraithwalk is super useful if you've got to get up and go, or if there's something that's going to be rooting you constantly on a fight. Wraithwalk will help you move a little bit quicker. Death Pact here, this is a 2-minute cooldown, big heal. It heals you for 50% of your max health, but also absorbs incoming healing equal to 30% of your max health for 15 seconds. When used in a very heavy AoE situation, when you're just taking a ton of damage, this can save you from dying, especially on something like Bursting. The problem with it, of course, is that you also then have a 30% heal absorb shield on you, but if it saves you from dying, completely worth it. This will have kind of niche uses, and wherever you can't use this, you'll probably be using Permafrost or Wraithwalk, depending on your preference. The 90 row is our AoE row. We have Gathering Storm. Each rune spent during Remorseless Winter increases its damage by 10% and extends its duration by 0.5 seconds. This is what I used all the time in live during Legion. It's a little bit different now because we don't have all the buffs to Remorseless Winter, so it's not as strong as it once was, but it's still pretty useful, and if you're going to have, a sustained AoE pool, this could be the best bet for you. Glacial Advance also sits in there fairly close to Gathering Storm. Glacial Advance is a 5-second CD, 30 runic power. You spew glacial spikes from the ground. They advance forward, dealing frost damage and applying razor ice to enemies near their eruption point. This lets you spread your, essentially your rune forge to everything in front of you there, so they take extra frost damage. This is really useful if you need more burst. It's also really useful when paired with Cold Heart, because they'll take extra damage as well. Pretty neat. And then we have Frostworm's Fury, probably the one that almost everyone's going to pick just because we're so used to having it at this point. 3-minute cooldown, summons the Frostworm to breathe on all enemies within 40 yards in front of you, dealing a massive, massive amount of frost damage and slowing their movement speed by 50% for 10 seconds. It's really odd to see this as a talent. I wish we could just have this baseline and just keep it forever. It's so iconic at this point for Frost Death Knight. But the fact that we have it back in a way that we can still use it, even if we don't use it 24/7, is good to see. This is just an absolutely hilarious ability to use in dungeons because it still just chunks a ton of HP off of everything it hits. Super useful, super flashy, one of the best abilities in the game in my opinion, just because of how cool it is. No pun intended. So level 100 row, these are our big top-end talents. These are slightly different than they were in Legion. So first here we have Ice Cap. Your Frost Strike and Obliterate crits reduce the remaining cooldown of Pillar of Frost by 1 second. If I remember correctly, this is exactly what it did in Legion, except it's now in the 100 row. This has been my go-to just purely because I am so used to having this, and that Pillar of Frost is just... It's your biggest and only real DPS cooldown. So this is, for me, pretty much the only pick at the moment. We also have Obliteration, which has changed completely. It's no longer an active, it's now a passive. While Pillar of Frost is active, Frost Strike and Howling Blast always grant Killing Machine and have a 40% chance to generate a rune. This is completely different from what it does on Live. On Live right now, it is a cooldown. It lasts for, I think it's like 10 or 15 seconds, and it affects what your Obliterate does. Now it, for some reason, makes your Frost Strike and Howling Blast grant Killing Machine all the time. A little weird that they changed it that much and left the name the same. I haven't seen a whole lot of use for this yet, and I'm not sure if it's because I just really prefer Ice Cap, or that it really just doesn't fit well with what the spec's doing right now. If you're interested in this talent, I know there's a good discussion going on about Frost Death Knights over on the Arceus Discord, so I highly recommend that you check that out. And then Breath of Syndragosa, this is pretty much the same as it was on, or for Legion rather. 15 runic power per second, 2-minute CD. You breathe frost damage every second, 2 enemies and a cone in front of you. Deals reduced damage to secondary targets. You will continue breathing until your runic power is exhausted or until you cancel the effect. When we get to the point where we have enough runic generation that we can maintain this for longer periods of time, right now it basically just falls off maybe 3 or 4 seconds later, just because generation is so low at this point with stats. But whenever we're able to maintain this for an extended period of time on a boss or during a high damage portion of an encounter, Breath of Syndragosa could definitely be what we want to be taking. Right now, though, I lean very heavily towards Ice Cap just because our damage spikes so much during Pillar of Frost. Other than that, those are the quick talent overview here of Frost DK. So let's go ahead and take a look at our spellbook. So in our spellbook here, as you'll notice, it completely changed whenever I swapped windows. That's really strange. So we have Anti-Magic Shell still. This is still our, stand in a ground mechanic we shouldn't be standing in, aka stand in that fire, get runic power ability. Super, super useful. Tons of things you can use this to cheese in Mythic Plus right now. Chains of Ice, normally just a snare. If you take Cold Heart, it makes it a damage ability. Control Undead, there are tons and tons of undead in this current expansion I've seen already. Most of them you cannot control, however the couple that you can are very, very deadly. So I highly recommend giving this a workout when you get the opportunity to. Corpse Exploder, this is from I believe this is a glyph from Legion. This is my character I copied over from Live. So this doesn't actually really do anything except explode a corpse. Pretty neat, rains gore. Can't complain about it, right? Class fantasy. Dark Command, a taunt. Hopefully we don't have to use this. Deathgate can still pop out to ebb and hold, so you can rune forge your weapon. Using it again will take you back to around where you departed from. This is really useful when you're farming old raids or old random dungeons and things like that. Just because you can pop it and then pop it again and get back to where you were and not have to use your Hearthstone. Super, super useful. Death Grip, 40-yard range. Pretend you're Scorpion for Mortal Kombat. Snag that mob that's running away and kill it quickly. And get a reset on it if you're taking the talent that I normally take. Death Strike, this here will heal you whenever you need it, 45 runic power. Physical damage, heals you for 35% of the damage taken in the last 5 seconds, minimum of 10% of your maximum health. You typically should not have to use Death Strike very often. When you're soloing, make sure you only use it when you have the Dark Sucker buff, because if you don't, it doesn't heal for much at all. Death's Advance, this is what they gave us in place of Wraithwalk baseline. You get an 8-second, 30% movement speed. You cannot be slowed below 100% of more normal movement speed, and you're immune to forced movement effects and knockbacks. So, to put that into perspective, if you were on, say, Mythic Kil'jaeden, or any Kil'jaeden really, where there are those orbs that knock you around the room, this will prevent you from getting knocked around. So, super, super useful. Actually, in quite a few dungeons where there are knockbacks or knock-ups in the air, this will prevent that from happening. Empower Rune Weapon. This is one of your DPS cooldowns. It gives you 15% haste and generates 1 rune and 5 runic power instantly, and then every 5 seconds for 20 seconds. Should definitely be paired with Pillar of Frost when you have the opportunity to, which should be every single time, and is incredibly strong when you just need that extra damage, or whenever you, of course, have, you know, Heroism, Time Warp, your potion up, etc., etc. Frost Strike, this is our runic power dump. Just deals basic frost damage. Does require melee range. Again, it doesn't have the little extended range it had from Legion, which is a shame because I really liked that about it, but it's alright. We need to be in melee anyway. We're a melee DPS. Frostworm's Fury, that's a talent. We can go ahead and skip over that. Howling Blast, this is our standard 1 rune ability. It deals a decent amount of frost damage and leaves Frost Fever on the target. Frost Fever deals damage over time and has a chance to grant the Death Knight 5 runic power each time it deals damage. So if there's a ton of enemies, make sure you always maintain Frost Fever on all of them. Shouldn't be too hard. 1 rune will typically cover your entire group of enemies. Icebound Fortitude, this is your standard damage reduction ability, but it also comes with stun immunity. Super useful when you know there's a stun coming, or whenever you just need to break a stun, because you can typically pop this whenever you are also stunned as well. Mind Freeze is our interrupt, 15-second cooldown, 15-yard range, doesn't cost any runic power anymore, thank goodness. Interrupts any spell in that school from being cast for 3 seconds. Obliterate, this is our big physical hit. It's a brutal attack with both weapons. It deals a total of 2,092 physical damage. This scales up, of course, as your weapons get higher, as you get more attack power. Super, super strong ability, and guaranteed crits occasionally as well. Path of Frost, super awesome utility. It's actually a 50-yard range. It makes everyone able to walk on water, usable while mounted, but if you're attacked or damaged, it cancels the effect and drops everyone into the water. So next time you have to jump off a cliff into a pool of water, be sure you pop this and hold your right mouse button down and auto run and all that stuff, so you go into the water and the rest of your group dies and yells at you. Pillar of Frost increases the power... the power of Frost increases your strength by 15% for 15 seconds. Each rune spent while active increases your strength by an additional 1%. So you want to make sure that you have, before you pop Pillar of Frost, that you are at almost full runes, that you're about to have 1 come off of cooldown, and then you want to go ham and get as much strength as you can as quickly as possible. Raise Ally. This is our battle res, 10-minute CD, does cost runic power, 60% health, 20% mana, instant resurrection. That you'll primarily be the person that is using a battle res now, because both Warlocks and Druids no longer have instant battle res, only Death Knight has that. Remorseless Winter, 1 rune, 20-second cooldown. Drain the warmth of life from all nearby enemies, dealing 3,000 frost damage over 8 seconds and reducing their movement speed by 20%. This is one of the most powerful abilities we have in general for a single rune. You definitely want to be using this on cooldown, if nothing else, just because you pop it and then for 8 seconds you're dealing extra damage. Also, it looks really cool. See? Swirlies. Rune Forging, this just lets you apply your Rune Forges. You have Razor Ice, which causes 35% extra weapon damage as frost damage and increases enemies' vulnerability to frost attacks by 3%, stacking up to 5 times. You want to stack Razor Ice as quickly as you can, so the more attack speed you have, the better. Fallen Crusader, this of course pairs with Razor Ice whenever you are a Frost Death Knight. Affixes your rune weapon with a rune that has a chance to heal you for 6% of your HP and increase total strength by 15% for 15 seconds. And then the last one we have is Stone Skin Gargoyle, which I don't believe anyone actually really uses anymore. It just gives you 5% armor, and all stats increase by 5%. Modifying your rune weapon, of course, does require the Rune Forge and Ebb and Hold. This one was primarily for tanks, will probably be used early on by Blood DKs until they get enough gear that they feel comfortable with Fallen Crusader. I myself just always use Fallen Crusader because I'm lazy and don't want to swap weapon chance when I'm attacking. But for Frost, you want to use 1 Razor Ice and 1 Fallen Crusader. So last here we have our couple passives. We have Dark Sucker. When you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, your next death strike within 20 seconds is free and heals for an additional 10% of your max health. So you always want to make sure that you are waiting to death strike until after you've killed something, if you have the opportunity to, just to chain it and get yourself more bang for your buck. Killing Machine is a passive. Your auto attack critical strikes have a chance to make your next Obliterate automatically crit. So please keep in mind Killing Machine only works on Obliterate, nothing else. Of course, Frost Scythe will benefit from it because it says specifically on it that it will. And then, of course, Mastery, Frozen Heart. This is just our baseline Mastery, just a simple frost damage increase. Mastery is definitely not our best stat as a Frost Death Knight, but it is still very, very useful. We have On a Pale Horse, 20% extra mounted move speed. Rhyme, Obliterate has a 45% chance to cause your next Howling Blast to consume no runes and deal 300% additional damage. Unless you need to maintain your Frost Fever, and you have not somehow gotten a Rhyme proc, you definitely want to wait for a Rhyme proc before casting Howling Blast. Very, very rare you will not cast Howling Blast without Rhyme active, just because it's kind of a waste of that rune. Then we have Runic Empowerment. Each runic power you spend... Sorry, excuse me, I coughed there. Each runic power you spend is a 1.5% chance to instantly grant you a rune. Frost is unique in that aspect. It's just, you just get the rune. It doesn't, you know, pop up over time like the Unholy ones do, where it speeds up the recovery. This just gives you the rune when you spend runic power occasionally, which is why you'll see Frost sometimes getting some absurd burst that kind of defies all logic and reason. In general, I feel Frost is going to be in a really good place for Mythic Plus. It brings a good bit of utility with its slows, its stun. It has access to the control undead as long as we have plenty of targets that are viable for it, as well as battle res and the ability to potentially off tank if you would need to for for whatever reason. You do have CDs and you can swap to a bring an extra weapon that has that Stone Skin Gargoyle on it if you would need to. Not that I would recommend it. All in all, Frost looks good damage-wise so far. The numbers do not appear to be too ridiculously good or bad. They're kind of right in the middle, which is where you honestly want to be when you're walking into tuning, because if you stay near the middle of the pack, you're just going to be consistently good, and you probably won't see big nerfs. At the same time, though, you won't see any huge buffs, most likely. But trust me when I say that middle of the pack is a great place for this to be at the start of an expansion, because during Legion's launch, Frost was dead last. So with that, guys, if you liked the video, throw me that like on there. If you didn't like it, dislike it, tell me it was terrible in the comments. I love reading comments, guys. They're really fun. Sub to the channel if you haven't already, so you'll see whenever I post more videos. And I will catch you next time. See ya!